Welcome to this Tutor to You AQA A-Level Sociology Paper 2 walkthrough for stratification. In this video we're going to look at 10-mark outline and explain questions on ethnicity and social mobility. The outline and explain question that appears on paper 2 is very specific to that paper. It reflects how a factor from one part of the specification will impact on another part of the specification, and requires students to make the links between a cause and an effect. In answering this type of question, students need to complete 2 extended paragraphs. Each paragraph should look at one way or reason that a factor from one part of the specification will impact on the other. This question requires students to analyse the explanation offered only. There is no explicit requirement to evaluate the ideas that they have put forward. What they need to do is to show a deeper understanding of the processes that are involved in linking the 2 factors. In this video, we're going to look at the question, outline and explain 2 ways in which an individual's ethnicity can influence their chances of social mobility. This question ties together information from the specification point on dimensions of inequality, what is sometimes referred to as life chances, and the specification point on social mobility. What students need to do is to talk about a specific social group and explain how factors will have an advantage or a disadvantage on that specific group in terms of their social mobility. We need to show how the cause links to the effect. So how does somebody's ethnic background lead to differences in social mobility? The first reason we can look at is employment discrimination and how some groups are discriminated against, both in terms of internal progression and application. We could use some research here. So for example, Wood et al. Found that there was discrimination at the application stage, which created barriers for some ethnic minority groups in gaining employment. Then we have to link this to social mobility. So an inability to achieve higher paid jobs, particularly at the application stage, can demonstrate that there are barriers to upward mobility for ethnic minority groups. If the question was on gender and social mobility, we could also use this explanation and talk about concepts like the glass ceiling. Our second way of looking at how ethnicity might impact on social mobility takes into account educational disadvantages. What we may do here is look at some of the groups who traditionally underperform in education, what we call differential educational achievement. Then what we need to explain is to take one of the reasons for differential educational achievement and apply that to an individual's life chances and their ability to achieve social mobility. So if we take, for example, institutional racism, as outlined by Gilbourne, we could suggest that this creates a barrier to students from some ethnic minority groups achieving their full potential. This also then limits their access to higher jobs and reduces intergenerational mobility. They're less likely to move from the social class their parents are in into a higher social class. Let's look at this in practice. So here we have a sample response that a student has written, and they've started out by saying that one way an ethnicity can influence social mobility is through employment discrimination, which affects opportunities for higher levels of employment, progression and promotion. They've identified the way. What they need to do now is to analyse how this happens. What they have done is they've talked about studies that show that ethnic minorities are often disadvantaged in accessing higher status and well-paid jobs. They've used some research. For example, Wood et al. Conducted a field experiment where matched job applications were sent to employers with names signalling different ethnic backgrounds. This study found that applications with white British names were significantly more likely to receive interview offers than those with names associated with ethnic minorities, despite having the same qualifications and experience. So we're talking about the process of employment discrimination. Now we need to talk about the impact, how does this impact on social mobility? This suggests that ethnic minorities face barriers to upward mobility, so there is an explicit reference to social mobility here, due to employer prejudice and systemic racism in recruitment. If individuals are blocked from entering or progressing in professional occupations, their ability to move into higher social classes is severely restricted. And the student has finished off this sentence by tying it back to the question. As a result, some ethnic minority groups face barriers to upward social mobility, leading to intergenerational, compared to their parents, and intragenerational, within their lifetime, social class immobility. So their response is applied to the demands of the question. They've highlighted a reason, that is discrimination in employment of ethnic minority groups, and they've applied it and linked it specifically to social class mobility. The second response, again, is focused on intergenerational disadvantages, and this is linked to educational inequalities. The student has explained that education is key for upward mobility, but research suggests that not all ethnic groups benefit equally from the education system. They've used some research done by Steve Strand in 2015 that found that while some ethnic groups such as Indian and Chinese students often outperform the national average, others such as Black Caribbean and Pakistani students tend to underachieve. They've followed this up with further research. Gilbourne argues that this is partly due to institutional racism, where school structures and teacher expectations disadvantage black students in particular through labelling and setting. So there's lots of different concepts introduced here: institutional racism, labelling, setting, teacher expectations, talking about the process of why ethnic minority groups may be disadvantaged in education. But we need to link this now to social mobility. This can result in fewer qualifications, which limits access to higher education and consequently professional job opportunities. Without the educational credentials needed for higher status occupations, the chances of upward mobility are reduced, but this is not the same for all ethnic groups. Now, this may appear to be evaluation in the last paragraph, but we can also see it as being part of the analysis, that there are differences between ethnic minority groups. And the student has finished this off by suggesting that Madood found that many ethnic minority families place a high value on education, seeing it as a route out of poverty. While these values can sometimes help overcome barriers, structural inequalities still make mobility more difficult for many ethnic minorities compared to their white British peers. So the student has shown a really good knowledge of the differences between ethnic groups within the education system and how that might impact on social mobility. Their analysis has compared and contrasted the expectations of different groups. Some exam gold here: when discussing ethnicity and sociology answers, be specific. Ethnic minority groups have differing levels of social mobility and differing life chances, and being specific shows that you understand how different ethnicities will experience society. That concludes this Tutor to You AQA A-Level Sociology Paper 2 walkthrough video, looking at the 10-mark outline and explain question on ethnicity and social mobility. Thanks for watching.